Alrighty, welcome back to another lesson. Today we are looking at lesson 2, which I'm going to unpack the fundamental course concepts in a bit more detail for you. So as always, highlight lesson 2 here, make sure you date it, whatever the date is for you now, and we'll scroll down, or you'll flick through your booklet to lesson 2. Here we go. So as we can see, each lesson has this little heading. We also always have our syllabus dot point straight underneath. So we're going to be looking at today in the syllabus is the fundamental course concepts. Okay, I'm not going to do this every single time we start a new topic, but just the first one. So every single concept in this course is really important. Okay, but having a solid understanding of these sort of core concepts, the fundamental and additional concepts, is absolutely essential. You will get a lot of multiple choice questions in your HSC that reflect this. And in fact, to prove it for you, here is a HSC paper from Society and Culture from 2015. Here's a question right here. Which of the following is an example of technology assisting communication between macro and micro levels of society? So you've got to choose the correct one based upon your understanding of these concepts. So really important that you know your stuff, basically. And to stress that point even further, I want everyone to highlight this. Every school assessment, major work, and HSC marking rubric will assess your understanding of these core course concepts. So make it your business to know them back to front. Again, I'll show you a HSC paper's marking criteria. Here it is. So, effectively applies relevant course concepts and language. Okay, there it is here. It appears again here. It appears again here, here, and here. So we've got to use course concepts, okay? If I go to another question, boom, here it is. Here it is. If I go to the next question, there it is. There it is again. So I think you get my point. In every single HSC exam, including the assessment task I'm going to give you, everything is really important and centered around concepts. And in fact, if we look at the HSC markers advice from exams every year, almost their number 1, number 2 advice is to integrate terminology into responses. So that's your course concepts, okay? That's how everyone can get better. And if you look and scroll down further to sections where they say in better responses students could do, here it is. They apply relevant course concepts and language to enhance the clarity of explanation and demonstrate thorough understanding. So concepts, very important. So the first one we're going to quickly look at today is persons. So persons is relating to the identity, personality, and characters of an individual. It's about very much the DNA structure of someone and the physiological aspects, so hair color, eye color, height, all of that forms a person. But it's also about the psychological aspect and profile of that person as well. Okay, so their thinking and their personality. So all of that forms the person, and that's what person is. And if we think one step further, our level of social and cultural literacy develops because we become more self-aware of ourselves, and our personal, social, and cultural identities are intertwined there. You'll find that this concept of persons is very closely linked with the concept of identity, which we're going to look at a little bit later in the next video. So that's what person is all about. So in a nutshell, if you want to annotate here on the side, it's very much about your physical person and your psychological person as well. The next one is society. Society, this is the context in which we live our lives. Society is made up of lots of different social institutions, and they all operate at micro, meso, and macro levels as well. So I've got a few listed here. So our family, friends, community, school, workplace, social media networks, all of this is part of society because it forms a social institution. And I guess this is why I have the image of the tree here. So can you imagine the trunk here is society itself, and the branches are social institutions. So here you might have family, here you might have the workplace, then school, then social media, the government, all of that sort of branches out. Society is like the core tree trunk, and social institutions are the branches. This is really where we interact with others, and this is where our role and status in society comes about through our interactions between all of these different things at micro, meso, and macro levels. So maybe next to here, I want you to annotate something to the effect of micro, meso, and macro levels. If you write that there, that's going to prompt you to think about, when you think of the concept of society, that you're thinking about social institutions, which I want you to highlight there, because that's very important to our understanding of this concept. And I'm just going to quickly go back and highlight the physiological and psychological, even though I said them in the wrong way, elements of that dot point. So society is very much about the social institutions, but it's also about it operating at a micro, meso, and macro level. Okay, and role and status is important too, because depending on our interactions with society, we'll all have a role and status. So my role and status in the meso world is to be a teacher and educate the next generation to become socially and culturally literate human beings. The other thing that's really important that we didn't highlight is that society is the context in which you live your life. Okay, that's a great way of putting it there as well. So that's society. Next is culture. So culture are our core values and beliefs. Boom, highlight that. So that is formed and shaped by culture. Now culture is really diverse and it's really nuanced. I want you to think of culture as all the unseen elements that change and define your way of life. Social institutions in society, in our previous concept, they're very visible. Like when you look at a school, you see the building, you see the teachers, you see students, uniform, books. The learning is contagious. It's all around you, right? Similar if you go to a workplace, you've got all the, your boss is there, your table and chairs are there, whatever your workplace looks like. If you're a firefighter, you've got the fire truck there. It's really, really visible, right? Whereas culture isn't always visible. It can be, certainly, when we look at things like flags, food, the way people dress, all of that's kind of culture too, but it's very much about the unseen but defining elements, and that's what I want you to highlight there. So someone's beliefs, now I mean you can't sort of technically see it. So let's say someone's culture really values generosity, right? You can sort of physically see generosity if someone's giving money to someone or letting them into their home and whatnot, but the actual core belief of it is something that you can't touch. It's not tangible, sort of thing. You can definitely see the effect of it, but you can't see it physically. And so because of that, when you are behaving in society, because culture is very much about your behavior as well, you're sort of doing things automatically and unconsciously. So the culture of greeting someone, you might not think about it very much, but when you see a friend, it's, hey, how are ya? How you going? You might give them a hug, you might give them a high five, knuckles, if you're a cool dude. Whatever it is, they're the sort of cultural norms and expected ways of behaving that have been ingrained to you as part of your core beliefs and values. I also want you guys, can you guys do a little up arrow and write behavior here, because it's really important that it's about your core beliefs, behaviors, and your values too. They're all shaped by it. So our beliefs and values and ideologies is another way of sort of looking at it. So an ideology is very much how it sounds. It's an idea, or it's a way of thinking, if you want to annotate that above there. Way of thinking. So our beliefs shape how we think and act towards others. So that's the behavior part I was talking about. It's how we act, but it's also how we think, right? If we see something, I see it all the time now as a new parent. If I'm in the park and I see someone, rousing their child for something which I think is quite silly or minute, my culture and my beliefs of parenting are making me think, you suck as a parent, you're a bad dad. But that's always based on my beliefs and values, right? And yes, you will have noticed I wasn't being very socially and culturally literate there, because I just made a judgment about their practices using the values of my own culture. No one's perfect, right? But that's how culture can shape the way you think and act. And culture is, like I said, it's implicit in everything. So a great example of that is if we look at our justice and legal system. Whilst there's laws that are very visible and are very, society driven, they're very much driven by the unseen elements of our culture and what we culturally deem as acceptable and not acceptable. Culture as well if you can annotate somewhere here, also can really operate at a micro, meso, and macro level. What I mean by that is your expectations and standards of behavior in your micro world when you're hanging out with your friends are very, very different to the cultural expectations when you're at the workplace or at school, right? And then again, very different if you're conducting yourself on social media. So they all call for different, I guess, values, beliefs, and ways of behaving, and that's all dependent on culture. But again, micro, meso, macro level interactions there, always important to consider. The next one is environment. And this is very much the physical setting and how that influences our life. So your environment will shape and determine your human activity. Okay, so what I mean by that is depending on where you live, the location, temperature, all the geographical features which are part of the environment, that shapes cultural identity. Okay, so that's where environment kind of comes in with SAC. That shapes the cultural identity. So if we look at, I guess, the Aussie outback or surfer identity stereotype, that's very much ingrained in Australian culture. Okay, most of us live on the coast in Australia, near some sort of beach, and when we don't, we live in the country. There's this kind of outback country bumpkin kind of, how you going, mate, sort of stereotype that you have associated with that. But that is very much linked to the cultural environment. It's that idea of that, you know, every living creature in Australia can kill you. That's very much based on our environmental cultural identity here. If anyone's ever been to Bali or Fiji, or they've gone to an islander sort of nation, they talk about this thing called Bali time or Fiji time, and it's that concept that they're late to everything because of the island they live in. You know, they live in paradise. Time and the concept of time is a little bit behind what Western culture in Australia, for example, would consider early or late arrival. But again, that's depicted on the environment. And culture, another just last example can be clothing. So people from the Middle East, you'll notice they're covered head to toe mostly, or even in a really hot day, their whole arms are covered up to their neck. And partly that culture has stemmed from as a reaction from the environment. If we look at the constant heat exposure that you are exposed to when you live along the equator, that's to protect your skin from sun damage, but it's also if there's sandstorms and stuff like that, you want to be covered because that can bite your skin and actually hurt. So, and similar if you're in a cold environment, the culture around Alaskan Eskimos and wearing the fluffy jackets and all that is really because it's just bloody freezing over there, So the environment can shape your cultural identity. That's the important key there. So this big bad boy here. The last one we're going to look at today is the concept of time. So time is a construct of culture. That's the main thing I want you to understand. How we view time is very much dependent on how we view culture. So for example, many cultures around the world view time into seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, etc. It starts here and it ends here. Other cultures have different interpretations of time. So if we look at Hindu culture, their perspective of time is cyclical. So instead of the Western linear model, or the more modern model where this happens and this happens, this happens, this happens, it's very timeline, it's linear, it has point A, point B, a clear beginning, a clear end. Hindus' belief of time is cyclical. There's birth, death, and then reincarnation. So it kind of goes around in a circle. Or if you look at the Western Christian perspective as well, it's sort of cyclical, but more so linear in the idea that what you do in this life might affect your afterlife. If you are Christian or Catholic, Anglican, etc. But the more contemporary, I guess, lens is really viewing it in a scientific sort of way, in a lens in hours, minutes, days, weeks, months, years. So time really is a construct of our culture. So that's it for today, guys. The last thing I want you to do is just a quick summary task. So in your big boy books, I want you to briefly outline how each fundamental concept affects your personal life. So if you want to annotate that and write micro world, I'll also allow meso world too. So micro/meso if you want to annotate that above personal life, and I want you to provide examples. So I've done one for you. So for example, time, it controls my daily routine. What I do and when I do it is dependent on the time. So school time, for example, governs when I wake up and when I go to bed each night. But I want you to do that for time, environment, culture, society, and persons at a micro-meso level. I'll leave you with this quality meme. Don't know how else to put it, but I'm kind of a big deal. So pretend that Ron Burgundy here is a course concept. They're a big deal. Thanks, guys.